My name is Clara. I am 33 years old, and I am a senior certified public accountant. Last Sunday, my parents looked me dead in the eye and told me to pack my bags and leave their house forever. They threw my house key into my dinner plate and handed me a cheap suitcase, telling me I was a useless spinster, taking up space that my sister and her husband needed for their growing family. I simply smiled, picked up the suitcase, and walked out the door. What they did not know was that I had a lawyer on speed dial, and the very house they were evicting me from was legally mine. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to entitled family members who completely underestimated your worth. Growing up in a quiet suburb in Texas meant keeping up appearances was everything. From the outside, my family looked picture perfect, but inside the dynamic was clear. My younger sister Audrey was the golden child, and I was the workhorse expected to foot the bill. I had lived in that house for 5 years, quietly paying every major expense while my parents pretended they were the ones providing for me. The betrayal happened during our traditional Sunday dinner. We were sitting around the mahogany dining table eating roast turkey and mashed potatoes. The atmosphere felt unusually tense. Audrey, who is 30 years old and calls herself a life coach despite having no actual clients, was sitting next to her husband Kendrick. Kendrick is a 32-year-old African-American man who loves wearing designer silk shirts and talking endlessly about his cryptocurrency investments. They were both smirking at me from across the table. I was just about to take a bite of my food when my father Richard suddenly stood up. His face was stern, his eyes completely devoid of warmth. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the brass spare key to the front door, and tossed it across the table. It landed with a dull thud, right in the middle of my mashed potatoes, splattering gravy onto the white tablecloth. "Leave the key and do not come back," my father said, his voice slicing through the quiet room. "This house was never yours." I sat frozen. Before I could ask what was going on, my mother Patricia walked into the dining room. She was dragging a cheap, faded blue suitcase. The wheels squeaked loudly against the hardwood floor. It was a flimsy bag, the zipper visibly straining. She dropped the handle, letting it hit the floor with a loud smack. "I packed your essentials," my mother said, refusing to meet my eyes. She nervously wiped her hands on her apron. "The rest of your things are in garbage bags out by the garage. You can hire a van for your furniture later." I looked at the four of them. Kendrick leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, a thoroughly arrogant expression on his face. "Look, Clara," Kendrick said, dripping with fake sympathy, "let us be real here. You are 33. You are single. You do not have a husband and you do not have any kids. Audrey and I are building a real legacy right now. We just found out we are expecting our first baby and we need the space." Audrey dramatically placed a hand over her flat stomach, smiling like she had just achieved world peace. "We need the master bedroom for the nursery," Kendrick continued, "and I need the guest room for my home office to monitor global financial markets. You make great money at your corporate accounting firm. You are just taking up space here. It is time for you to move out." I looked at my father, expecting him to intervene. Instead, he just glared at me. "Kendrick is the man of his household now," my father barked. "He is providing me with a grandchild." "What have you provided, Clara?" "Just spreadsheets. Family helps family, and you have worn out your welcome." My mother nodded eagerly. "It is practical, sweetheart. You can rent a small apartment downtown. It fits your lonely lifestyle better anyway." The sheer audacity of their entitlement burned in my chest. They were kicking me out so Kendrick could have an office to trade imaginary internet money. But years of auditing complex financial records had trained me to keep a perfect poker face. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not beg them to let me stay. I slowly picked up my linen napkin, wiped the corners of my mouth, and placed it neatly beside my plate. I stood up, walked over to the cheap blue suitcase, and gripped the handle firmly. I turned away from the dining table and began walking toward the front hallway. The plastic wheels of the cheap blue suitcase rumbled against the expensive Persian rug in the living room, a rug I had purchased for my mother just last Christmas. Behind me, the sound of silverware clinking against porcelain resumed immediately. My father went right back to eating his roast turkey, dismissing my departure as easily as if he were swatting away a fly. My mother was already leaning over Audrey, excitedly whispering about pastel paint colors for the new nursery. They were celebrating my eviction before I was even out of the house. "Hey, Clara, wait a second," Kendrick called out. His voice echoed down the hallway, dripping with that unbearable smug arrogance he always carried. I stopped near the front door but did not turn around. "I just want to make sure you know that Audrey and I have this handled," Kendrick said loudly, making sure my parents could hear him playing the hero. "You do not need to worry about the rent anymore. I know you were paying your dad $1,000 a month to stay in this room, but my crypto portfolio is absolutely booming right now. I will be covering the rent from now on to take care of the family. You just go find yourself a nice, quiet studio apartment where you will not bother anyone." I stood perfectly still, my hand resting lightly on the cool brass of the front doorknob. Rent. That was what my father had been calling it all these years. For 5 years, I had been transferring exactly $985 into my father's bank account on the first of every single month. He proudly told Kendrick and Audrey it was rent, framing it as a generous contribution for letting his sad single daughter live under his roof. What Kendrick did not know, and what my father was desperately trying to keep hidden from his new favorite son-in-law, was that this exact amount perfectly covered the annual property taxes, the premium homeowners insurance, and the neighborhood association fees. My father had not paid a single dime toward the upkeep of this property in half a decade. I was not paying rent. I was funding their entire comfortable existence. I turned around slowly, looking back at the dining room. It looked like a painting of a perfect happy family, with me deliberately cut out of the frame. Audrey was scrolling through luxury baby furniture on her phone. My mother was pouring Kendrick another glass of the expensive wine I had paid for. My father refused to even look in my direction. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" I asked, my voice cutting sharply through their little celebration. The room went completely quiet for a brief moment. My father finally looked up, his face reddening with defensive anger. "We are sure, Clara," he snapped harshly. "Leave the key and get out." I looked at each of them one last time, locking their faces into my memory. "All right," I said smoothly, letting a cold, controlled smile touch my lips. "But I want all of you to remember this exact moment. Remember that you are the ones asking me to walk out of this door. When the dust settles, do not say, 'I did not warn you.'" Without waiting for a response, I stepped out onto the front porch and pulled the heavy oak door shut behind me. The lock clicked into place with a sharp final sound. The crisp evening air hit my face, and for the first time all day, I took a deep, unrestrained breath. I walked down the paved driveway, passing the black garbage bags my mother had callously tossed near the garage. My entire life reduced to trash bags and a broken suitcase. I reached the edge of the sidewalk and stopped under the warm glow of the street lamp. I did not have a car waiting. I did not even have a hotel booked yet, but I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. The toxic weight I had been carrying for years was finally lifted. Suddenly, the silence of the quiet suburban street was broken by the sharp vibration of my phone in my coat pocket. I pulled it out. The bright screen illuminated the dark sidewalk. The caller ID flashed a name that instantly made my professional corporate instincts kick in: Lawyer Harrison. Harrison was a senior partner at a top-tier real estate and estate planning firm in downtown Austin. He was not the kind of man who called his clients on a Sunday evening unless something was catastrophically wrong. I swiped the screen to answer. "Hello, Harrison," I said, keeping my tone strictly professional. Clara Harrison's deep, urgent voice came through the speaker. "I am sorry to bother you on a Sunday evening, but we have a massive problem. I just got an emergency alert from my contacts at the county clerk office." I frowned, gripping the handle of my suitcase tighter. "What is going on?" "Clara, your father just tried to file a quitclaim deed." I stopped walking. The evening breeze suddenly felt a lot colder against my face. "A quitclaim deed?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave as I tightened my grip on the handle of my cheap blue suitcase. "Harrison, what exactly are you talking about?" Harrison let out a heavy sigh through the phone, the exact kind of tired sigh a seasoned lawyer makes when dealing with incredibly foolish criminals. "First thing Friday afternoon, Your father and your brother-in-law walked into the Travis County Clerk office. They presented a quitclaim deed to transfer the property title entirely into the names of Audrey and Kendrick, and Clara, the document had your signature on it as the grantor. My grip on the phone tightened so hard my knuckles turned white. My signature: I have not signed any property transfer documents. I have been at my accounting firm all week, preparing for corporate tax season, auditing multi-million-dollar accounts. I was busy working 12-hour shifts, while my own family was plotting to steal a massive real estate asset right out from under me. I know you did not sign it, Harrison said flatly, because the signature was an absolute mess. It looked like someone tried to trace it from one of your old college documents, but the forged signature is not even what stopped the transfer. Kendrick brought in a document with a fake notary stamp. He apparently bought a custom ink stamp online and tried to act as his own official notary public. The clerk immediately flagged it because the commission number on the stamp did not exist in the Texas State Registry, the formatting was completely wrong, and the ink color did not match standard state regulations. I closed my eyes, picturing the scene in vivid detail. I could perfectly imagine Kendrick strolling up to the county clerk window in his flashy designer silk shirt, flashing a confident, arrogant smile. He actually thought he could outsmart the local government with a cheap rubber stamp he bought on the internet. I could picture my father standing right beside him, nodding along, entirely complicit in committing a federal offense just to secure a massive house for his golden child and her fake entrepreneur husband. Did they cause a scene, I asked already, knowing the answer based on Kendrick and his notoriously explosive temper. Oh, absolutely, Harrison replied, his tone laced with professional disgust. The clerk told my contact that Kendrick demanded to speak to a supervisor immediately. He started yelling, claiming the county system was broken, and that he was a high-net-worth crypto investor who did not have time for bureaucratic mistakes. When the supervisor threatened to call the county sheriff for fraudulent filing and document forgery, their bravery suddenly vanished. They snatched the paperwork right off the counter and ran out the door before security could detain them. My mind raced as the timeline suddenly made sickening sense. They tried to steal the house legally on Friday. When that completely failed and they nearly got arrested, they panicked. They decided to physically evict me today on Sunday. They probably hoped that once I was physically out of the picture, they could find another way to manipulate the paperwork. Or maybe just change the locks and claim adverse possession of the property over time. They wanted me gone so they could bring in shady appraisers or unregulated loan officers without me looking over their shoulders and asking questions. They needed the house empty to finalize whatever ridiculous financial scheme Kendrick had cooked up. Clara Harrison's voice grew intensely serious, shifting back into lawyer mode. This is textbook wire and mail fraud if they try to submit this anywhere else. They forged your signature on a legal property transfer document. I have already flagged the title with the county to prevent any unauthorized changes, but you need to be very careful. Your father and Kendrick are desperate, and desperate men make incredibly stupid mistakes. Do you want me to file an official police report right now? We have enough evidence to have them questioned by authorities. I stood under the warm glow of the street lamp, looking back at the large colonial house at the end of the street. The lights were blazing in every single room. Through the large bay window, I could see the silhouette of Kendrick walking back and forth in the living room, gesturing wildly. He was probably bragging to Audrey about how he expertly handled the situation, promising her that the house was finally theirs. They actually thought they had won. They thought they had successfully thrown the useless spinster out of her father's house. A strange sensation bubbled up in my chest. It started as a low, quiet chuckle and quickly grew into a cold, hard laugh. My laughter echoed down the quiet suburban street, cutting through the silence of the neighborhood. Clara Harrison asked, sounding slightly concerned through the phone speaker. "Are you all right? This is a very serious legal matter." "I am perfectly fine, Harrison," I replied, a wide, triumphant smile spreading across my face. "Let them try to file all the fake paperwork they want. Let them celebrate kicking me out into the cold, because what my father does not know, and what he has conveniently chosen to ignore, is that the house does not even belong to him." Harrison paused on the other end of the line. "I know that, Clara. I am the one who drafted the trust documents for your grandfather 6 years ago. But your father seems to have convinced himself and Kendrick otherwise. Exactly, I said, leaning against a cool brick wall. My grandfather was a very smart man. He saw right through my father and his lies. Growing up, my father Richard projected the image of a highly successful family man. He drove incredibly nice cars and loved bragging at expensive neighborhood barbecues. But my grandfather knew the dark truth behind the shiny facade. My father was a severe gambler. He had secretly blown through my parents' savings and nearly bankrupted the family twice. My mother Patricia was the ultimate enabler, always covering up his massive financial messes and pretending everything was perfectly fine to protect their precious social status in our wealthy Texas suburb. When my grandfather was diagnosed with terminal cancer 6 years ago, he knew he could not leave his massive colonial estate to his son. If he gave the house to my father, it would be heavily mortgaged to pay off bookies within a month. My grandfather also knew he could not leave it to Audrey, who was incredibly irresponsible, refused to hold down a real job, and was deeply spoiled by my mother. So my grandfather did the smartest thing possible. He created an irrevocable trust. He placed the house fully paid off into the trust and named me as the sole trustee and beneficiary. Legally, the house belonged to the trust and I controlled it completely. The trust was ironclad. No one could alter it, not even my father, and certainly not Kendrick with his fake internet rubber stamp. Before my grandfather passed away, he held my hand and made me promise to protect the asset. He told me I could let my parents live there so they would not be homeless, but I was never to give my father the title. For 5 years, I honored that promise. I moved into a small guest room. I paid the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance, and the upkeep, while letting my father pretend to his friends that he was the benevolent patriarch, allowing his single daughter to live under his roof. I protected his fragile ego. And in return, he tried to steal my house and kick me to the curb on a Sunday night. Harrison, what happens if they try to use that forged document somewhere else? I asked, watching the traffic. If they try to secure a loan against the property, using that fake deed, it elevates to federal bank fraud, Harrison explained. Because the property is in an irrevocable trust, any legitimate lender will run a title search. The search will immediately show the trust as the owner. No bank will ever give them a dime without your physical presence and verified signature as the trustee. Their scheme is completely dead in the water. They just do not realize it yet. I smiled coldly into the night. They think they outsmarted me, Harrison. Let them keep thinking that. I want them to dig their hole so deep they can never climb out of it. Clara, be careful, Harrison warned. People like your father and Kendrick get extremely dangerous when backed into a corner. I will monitor the county clerk filings daily. Call me if they try anything else. I will. Thank you, Harrison, I said, and ended the call. I stood there, enjoying the cool night air. The heavy burden of keeping my family's secrets was finally gone. I did not have to pretend anymore. I did not have to endure Kendrick making snide remarks about my personal life. They had given me the perfect excuse to finally cut the cord forever. I pulled out my phone to search for an upscale hotel. I had plenty of money in my checking account to afford a luxury suite while I figured out my next move. But before I could open the booking application, my phone buzzed violently in my palm. A text message popped up on the brightly lit screen. It was from my mother. I opened the message. It was written in all capital letters, radiating pure anger and panic. Where exactly are you hiding the real property deed? Now you are a selfish, ungrateful thief. Kendrick said the county clerk needs the original paper to process the transfer for his new family. Tell us where you put it right now, or your father is calling the police. I stared at the glowing screen, letting out a soft sigh. They were actually threatening to call the local police on me for stealing a house that I legally owned. I stared at the glowing screen, letting out a soft sigh. They were actually threatening to call the local police on me for stealing a house that I legally owned. Instead of typing out a furious reply, I tapped the call button. I wanted to hear exactly how far they were willing to take this delusion. The phone rang only half a time before the line clicked open. "Where is it, Clara?" my father yelled instantly. His voice was so loud, I had to hold the phone an inch away from my ear. I could hear the echo of the dining room in the background, which meant he had put me on speakerphone for the whole family to hear. "Where is what, Dad?" I asked calmly, feigning complete ignorance. "Do not play stupid with me," he barked. Kendrick went to the county office to handle the property transfer, and the clerk said the paperwork had an issue. "We know you hid the original deed when you packed your bags. You are trying to sabotage your sister and her new baby. You are a bitter, jealous thief, and I will not let you ruin my family legacy." I almost laughed out loud at the phrase family legacy. Before I could respond, Kendrick's voice boomed through the speaker. "Listen to me very carefully," Clara Kendrick sneered, using that fake authoritative tone he always put on to impress my parents. "I know you are trying to pull some accounting trick to stall the transfer, but I have connections in this town. If you do not tell us where you hid the real property documents in the next 5 minutes, we are calling the police. We will have you arrested for grand theft and withholding legal family documents. You will lose your precious CPA license." My mother chimed in from the background. "Just tell us where it is, Clara. Why do you always have to make everything so difficult? Just give Kendrick the house so we can all move on." I stood under the street lamp listening to the four of them essentially confess to their own ignorance. They had no idea how an irrevocable trust worked. They had no idea that the deed Kendrick tried to file was a forgery that could send him to federal prison. They just blindly believed that screaming and bullying would magically change real estate law. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat and professional. "We are not finished until you tell us where the deed is," my father yelled. "I am not hiding anything from you," I said simply. "You have everything you are legally entitled to in that house. Good luck with the new nursery." I ended the call right as Kendrick started shouting another threat. I blocked both of their numbers immediately. Arguing with them was a complete waste of time. They wanted to play hardball, but they did not realize they had just stepped onto a court where I owned the ball, the hoop, and the entire stadium. I opened my banking application on my phone. Because my father had completely destroyed his credit score years ago with his underground gambling debts, he could not even get a basic utility account approved. When my grandfather put the house in the trust 5 years ago, I had to put every single utility account under my name and my social security number. The electricity, the water, the natural gas, the high-speed internet, everything was tied directly to my pristine credit and paid automatically from my corporate CPA bank accounts. They wanted me out of the house. They told me I was no longer part of the family. That meant I no longer had any financial obligations to their comfort. I opened the electric company application first. I navigated to the account settings, selected Manage Service, and tapped the bright red button labeled Stop Service. A prompt popped up asking for the disconnect date. I selected today. A secondary prompt asked for the time. I typed in 11:59 p.m. I hit confirm. Next, I opened the Municipal Water Department application. I repeated the exact same process. Stop service. Effective tonight at midnight. Confirm. Finally, I logged into the natural gas provider portal. It was currently the middle of winter and temperatures were expected to drop below freezing by the early hours of the morning. They relied entirely on the gas furnace to keep that massive colonial warm. I clicked Terminate Service. Effective tonight. Confirm. Within 3 minutes, I had systematically dismantled the invisible safety net they had been living on for half a decade. I slipped my phone back into my coat pocket and finally hailed a premium rideshare service to take me to a luxury downtown hotel. Let us see how much they love their new house in the dark. I settled into the crisp sheets of my luxury hotel suite, but across town, the reality of my actions was hitting my family with the force of a freight train. I learned the exact details of their midnight meltdown days later, when I requested the police dispatch transcript and spoke with my amused neighbors. At exactly 11:59 p.m., Audrey was sitting in the living room bathing in the glow of a professional ring light. She was broadcasting a live video to her 42 followers on social media, dispensing her usual toxic positivity. According to a recording a friend saved, Audrey was passionately telling her audience they needed to manifest luxury real estate by simply cutting out negative energy. She meant me, of course. Then the clock struck midnight. The transition was instantaneous. Every single light bulb in the colonial house died at once. The humming of the refrigerator stopped. The central heating system gave a pathetic wheeze before going silent. Most importantly for Audrey, the internet router blinked out of existence. Her ring light vanished, plunging her stream into darkness. Audrey let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the empty hallways. She stumbled blindly through the pitch-black living room, knocking over a brass floor lamp. She scraped her knee against the mahogany coffee table and fell onto the rug. "What is going on?" Audrey shrieked, waving her hands. My stream crashed. I was in the middle of a major life coaching breakthrough. My fans are going to abandon me. Upstairs, Kendrick was equally furious. He had been sitting in the guest room, the room he planned to turn into his trading floor, staring at 3 computer monitors. When the power failed, his desktop computers shut down instantly. He burst out of the bedroom, his heavy footsteps pounding down the hardwood stairs in the dark. "Did someone trip the main breaker?" Kendrick yelled, using his phone flashlight to navigate the steps. "I was in the middle of a massive crypto transaction. If I lose my position on this coin, it will cost us thousands of dollars." My father, Richard, who had been comfortably asleep in the master bedroom, stumbled out into the hallway wearing his silk pajamas. He was grumbling loudly, complaining that a man of his stature should not have to deal with power outages. He marched down to the basement with his own flashlight to check the electrical panel. He flipped the main breaker switch back and forth several times, but nothing happened. He looked out the basement window. The street outside was illuminated by street lamps. The houses of the neighbors were glowing warmly. Their house was the only one swallowed by complete darkness. "It is not the breaker panel," my father announced as he stomped back upstairs, his voice tight with frustration. "The whole house is completely dead." My mother, Patricia, walked out of the kitchen looking panicked. "Richard," she said, her voice trembling in the freezing air. "I just tried to turn on the kitchen faucet to get a glass of water. Nothing is coming out. Not even a single drop. The plumbing pipes are completely dry." The harsh reality began to settle over them, along with the rapidly dropping temperature. It was the middle of a Texas winter cold front. Without the natural gas furnace running, the house was quickly turning into an icebox. They were standing in the dark, shivering in their pajamas, completely cut off from the modern world. They had a beautiful home, but without my bank account feeding the utility companies, it was nothing more than an empty wooden shell. Kendrick paced furiously in the living room, the beam of his flashlight bouncing off the walls. "This is Clara," he growled, his voice vibrating with pure rage. "That bitter spinster actually called the utility companies and canceled everything. She took her name off the accounts just to spite us." Audrey started sobbing loudly, wrapping a throw blanket around her shivering shoulders. "How could she do this to a pregnant woman?" she cried. "She is trying to freeze my baby. She is psychotic and jealous of my happiness." My father stood in the hallway, his face twisting into absolute fury. His ego could not handle the fact that I had outsmarted them. He pulled his cell phone out, his fingers jabbing at the glowing screen. "I am not letting her get away with this," my father snarled, breathing heavily. "Richard, what are you doing?" my mother asked nervously. My father held the phone to his ear, his eyes wild with anger. "I am dialing 911. I am telling the police that a disgruntled former tenant came onto our property and violently vandalized our utility boxes. I was completely unaware of the chaotic meltdown unfolding at my childhood home. I was lying in a plush, king-sized bed at an exclusive luxury hotel downtown, enjoying the absolute silence and the comfortable 70-degree temperature of the room. I had just finished reviewing some preliminary tax documents for a corporate client on my laptop when a loud, authoritative knock shattered the quiet of my suite. It was not the gentle tap of late-night room service. It was 3 heavy, measured strikes against the thick wooden door. I glanced at the digital clock resting on the mahogany nightstand. It was 1:45 in the morning. I slipped on the complimentary silk robe provided by the hotel, tied the sash around my waist, and walked over to the door. I leaned forward and looked through the brass peephole. 2 police officers in full uniform were standing in the carpeted hallway. Their expressions were stern, their jaws tight, and their hands were resting casually near their heavy utility belts. I opened the door just enough to see them clearly, keeping the security chain attached for the moment. Good evening, officers, I said calmly. How can I help you? The taller officer, a broad-shouldered man with a graying mustache and a heavy Texas drawl, looked me up and down with clear suspicion. Are you Clara? He asked, his tone sharp and highly accusatory. Yes, I am, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level. Ma'am, we need you to open this door and step out into the hallway, the second officer said. He was younger, but his eyes were just as hard. We received a highly distressing 911 call from a homeowner in the northern suburbs. A Mr. Richard claimed that a disgruntled former tenant, specifically you, was forcibly evicted from his property earlier this evening. He stated that you returned to the residence around midnight, trespassed on the private grounds, and maliciously destroyed the electrical meter and the gas lines to plunge his family into the freezing cold. The taller officer stepped closer, placing a heavy hand on the doorframe, as if to prevent me from closing it. Destruction of private property and tampering with municipal utility lines are serious criminal offenses, ma'am. Mr. Richard also informed us that his highly vulnerable pregnant daughter is currently trapped in that freezing house because of your reckless actions. He intends to press full felony charges against you. We need to know exactly where you were at midnight tonight. I did not panic. I did not stutter, cry, or act defensive. The sheer audacity of my father actually calling the police and weaponizing them against me was almost impressive in its absolute stupidity. He truly thought he could use the local authorities to bully me back into submission. He assumed I would be terrified of angry men in uniform and immediately cave to his demands, just to avoid a public scandal. He completely forgot that my entire professional career as a senior certified public accountant involved dealing with intimidating federal auditors and navigating highly complex legal compliance. A genuine, relaxed smile spread across my face. I reached up and undid the security chain, opening the door completely. I stepped back, gesturing welcomingly toward the spacious, brightly lit living area of my luxury suite. Officers, I understand exactly why you are here, and I genuinely appreciate you doing your jobs so diligently in the middle of the night, I said smoothly. But before you read me my rights or try to detain me for vandalism, I highly recommend you step inside for just 2 minutes. I promise it will clarify everything. The two officers exchanged a confused, skeptical glance. Suspects accused of unhinged midnight vandalism usually do not smile warmly and invite the police inside for a casual chat. They cautiously stepped into the room, their eyes scanning the pristine suite. There were no signs of muddy shoes, no heavy tools, and absolutely no evidence of someone who had just been sneaking around a dark suburban backyard, destroying electrical boxes. I closed the heavy wooden door behind them and walked over to the large glass coffee table in the center of the room. When I arrived at the hotel earlier, I had requested the concierge print out several key legal documents that my lawyer Harrison had emailed me. They were fanned out perfectly across the polished glass surface. I am not a disgruntled former tenant, and I certainly did not vandalize any municipal property tonight, I told them, keeping my voice incredibly polite and confident. I simply canceled the utility services that I was personally paying for out of my own pocket. Please take a close look at the paperwork right there on the coffee table. I think you will find my father left out a few very important details. The taller officer stepped forward, his heavy boots sinking deeply into the carpet. He looked down at the legal documents neatly arranged on the clear glass table. I gestured toward the first document. That is my official state-issued identification, and right next to it is my certified public accountant license, I said. I am a senior auditor for a major corporate accounting firm right here in Texas. I deal with strict federal compliance and complex financial structures every single day. I do not sneak around in the dark breaking electrical meters. I just follow the law exactly as it is written. The younger officer leaned in his eyes carefully, scanning the stack of premium paper. What exactly is all this, then? He asked, his tone completely losing its aggressive edge. That is a certified copy of the irrevocable trust established by my late grandfather 6 years ago, I explained, keeping my voice perfectly calm. If you look closely at page 4, you will see my name listed legally as the sole trustee and beneficiary. My father, Richard, who called you tonight, does not own that property. He has never owned it, He has been living there under my permission for 5 years because I promised my grandfather I would not let him gamble his life away. The taller officer picked up the trust document, reading through the complex legal jargon. He flipped to the signature page, noting the official notary stamps that proved its complete authenticity. He looked at the next stack of papers. These are the utility bills for the residential address. I continued, pointing to the statements from the electric, water, and gas companies. Every single account is strictly under my name. Every bill for the past 5 years was paid directly from my personal banking account. My father has not contributed a single penny. I picked up my tablet, woke up the screen, and showed them the digital confirmation emails I received an hour ago. Earlier this evening, my father and my brother-in-law suddenly decided to illegally evict me. They packed my bags and told me to leave the key on the table. Because I am the legal owner and was forced out without any eviction notice, I logged into my utility portals and submitted requests to disconnect the services in my name. I did not smash any electrical boxes. I just clicked a button. The room was deafeningly silent. The older officer put the trust document back onto the table. The stern, accusatory glare he had worn completely vanished, replaced by profound, visible embarrassment. He looked at his younger partner, who was shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "So let me get this straight," the taller officer said, letting out a frustrated breath. "Your father kicked you out of a house you actually own legally, and then he called emergency services claiming you came back to vandalize the property just because you shut off your own utilities to stop paying for his comfort." "That is exactly correct, officer," I replied. Furthermore, my lawyer informed me that on Friday afternoon, my father and brother-in-law attempted to file a forged quitclaim deed with the county clerk to illegally transfer the property into their names. When that federal crime failed, they resorted to kicking me out tonight. The younger officer crossed his arms, his face turning red with anger. "They lied directly to a 911 dispatcher," he said. "They told us there was a violent trespasser destroying municipal property. They wasted valuable city resources and sent us here prepared for a hostile confrontation, all because they were mad the lights went out." I nodded slowly. "I apologize that my family dragged you into their financial tantrums. But as you can see, I have been sitting here in my hotel room the entire time doing absolutely nothing but reviewing corporate tax files." The taller officer rubbed the back of his neck with a tired sigh. He was furiously angry now, but definitely not at me. Police officers absolutely hate being used as disposable pawns in petty domestic disputes, and they deeply despise being manipulated by liars. He looked back at me, his strict demeanor completely shifting from an intimidating enforcer to a highly respectful and professional ally. "Ma'am, we are incredibly sorry for disturbing your evening," the older officer said, his voice full of genuine apology. "You have completely proven your case. We will make a full note in the dispatch system that the caller fabricated the entire story." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as a grim and determined expression crossed his face. He adjusted his heavy utility belt and looked me dead in the eye. "Ma'am, would you like to press charges against your father for filing a false police report?" I looked at the older officer, considering his offer carefully. As tempting as it was to have my father arrested and dragged out of that freezing house in handcuffs, I knew it would give my mother and Audrey the ultimate victim narrative. They would twist the story to make me look like a vindictive monster who imprisoned her own father over a family disagreement. No, I wanted them to face the financial ruin they had created themselves. "Not tonight, officer," I replied softly but firmly. "I do not want to escalate this into a criminal matter if I do not have to, but I would appreciate it if you could call him back right now and explain exactly what he is risking. I want him to know that his little intimidation game has officially failed." The officer nodded in understanding. He pulled his police radio from his belt, checked the dispatch number, and used his personal cell phone to dial my father. He put the phone on speaker and set it on the glass coffee table right next to my authentic trust documents. The phone rang twice before my father answered. His voice was smug and entirely too confident. "Yes, officer," he said eagerly. "Have you apprehended Clara yet? Has she confessed to destroying my property?" "Mr. Richard," the officer said, his voice dropping into a hard, unforgiving tone, "we are currently sitting in a luxury hotel suite with Clara. We have reviewed her certified public accountant credentials, her utility payment records, and most importantly, the certified copy of the irrevocable trust, which names her as the sole legal owner of the property you are currently occupying. There was a dead-heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear my father panicking, his heart dropping into his stomach. The officer did not give him a chance to recover. Let me make this incredibly clear to you, sir. Clara did not vandalize anything. She legally disconnected utilities that belong to her on a property that belongs to her. You, however, lied to a 911 dispatcher. You attempted to weaponize this police department against the legal homeowner. Filing a false police report is a Class B misdemeanor, and depending on the damages claimed, it can easily escalate to a state felony. But my father stammered, his arrogant facade completely shattering. She threw us into the cold. My pregnant daughter is freezing. Then I suggest you pack your bags and find a hotel, the officer snapped back. Clara has graciously declined to press formal criminal charges against you tonight. But if you call emergency services again with these fabricated lies, or if you attempt to harass her in any way, I will personally drive back to that house and put you in the back of my patrol car. Do I make myself absolutely clear? Yes, sir, my father whispered, sounding entirely defeated. The officer ended the call. I thanked the officers for their incredible professionalism, and they quietly left my hotel suite. I finally crawled into the warm king-sized bed, assuming the drama was over for the night. I was wrong. Back at the dark, freezing colonial house, my father was in a state of absolute panic. He had just realized that not only was he powerless, but he was inches away from a criminal record. But Audrey, the golden child, refused to accept defeat. If they could not win using the police, she would use the only weapon she had left. Social media manipulation. Using her cellular data. Audrey propped her phone up on the kitchen counter, lit her face with a battery-powered ring light, and hit record. She uploaded the video directly to the private neighborhood homeowner association Facebook group, a digital gathering place full of bored, wealthy suburbanites who thrived on local gossip. I did not see the video until much later, but the transcript was a masterclass in toxic gaslighting. Audrey sat in the freezing dark, wrapped in a blanket, forcing massive crocodile tears down her cheeks. Please help us, Audrey sobbed to the camera. My sister Clara has suffered a complete mental breakdown. She is so deeply jealous of my pregnancy and my happy marriage to Kendrick that she has completely lost her mind. She illegally canceled all the utilities to our family home in the middle of winter. She is trying to freeze my unborn baby. My father tried to reason with her, but she bribed the local police with her fancy corporate lawyers. We are terrified, and we do not know what she will do next. Audrey knew exactly what she was doing. She played the helpless pregnant victim, perfectly portraying me as a bitter, unhinged spinster trying to destroy a beautiful, growing family. The video went live in the HOA group at 2:30 in the morning. At 6 a.m., my phone began to buzz incessantly on the hotel nightstand. It vibrated so violently it nearly fell off the edge. I reached over and picked it up, squinting at the bright screen. I had over 40 new notifications, text messages from neighbors I had not spoken to in years, Facebook messages from the HOA president, emails from random community members. They were all flooded with absolute vitriol. How could you do this to your own pregnant sister, one text read. You are a monster, Clara read another. The HOA board will be holding an emergency meeting to discuss your removal from the neighborhood. I sat up in bed, the soft hotel sheets pooling around my waist. Audrey had successfully turned the entire neighborhood against me overnight. They were completely blinded by her tears. I looked at the flood of hate messages, but instead of feeling intimidated, I felt a familiar, cold determination settle in my chest. If my family wanted a public spectacle, I would gladly give them one they would never forget. Instead of replying to a single hateful text message, I put my phone on silent. I walked into the marble bathroom, took a long hot shower, and washed away the lingering stress of the previous night. I ordered a premium room service breakfast and sat by the large window overlooking the downtown skyline, eating perfectly poached eggs and drinking fresh espresso while my family froze in the suburbs. By 9 in the morning, I decided to check the neighborhood Facebook group again to see exactly how far Audrey was willing to take her fake victim narrative. She had not just posted another crying video, she had posted a digitally designed invitation. The bold cursive font read, "Welcome to the new chapter, a housewarming and baby celebration." Underneath the title, Audrey had written a long, dramatic paragraph. She claimed that despite my cruel, unhinged attempts to freeze her unborn child, her amazing husband Kendrick had stepped up as the ultimate provider. He had rented a massive industrial generator to power the entire estate and save the family from my vindictive wrath. Kendrick could not stand looking weak in front of the wealthy neighbors. He desperately needed to prove that he was a highly successful cryptocurrency investor who did not need my utility accounts. To fund this grand illusion, he had hired a premium catering company, ordered expensive floral arrangements, and invited the entire homeowner association board to the backyard for a lavish afternoon party. It was a highly calculated, manipulative move. By hosting the neighbors and playing the gracious victims, they were trying to establish social dominance and cement their fake claim of ownership over my property. My phone rang, breaking my concentration. It was Lawyer Harrison. "Clara," he said, sounding both amused and professionally exasperated. "I just got off the phone with the City Code Enforcement Office. Your brother-in-law actually rented a massive diesel construction generator. It is currently sitting right in your front driveway, illegally blocking the public sidewalk and powering your entire house through a highly dangerous maze of thick orange extension cords." I laughed softly, shaking my head at the sheer absurdity of their actions. Kendrick was spending thousands of dollars he did not actually have to impress people who would turn on him in an absolute heartbeat. "Let him keep it running for today, Harrison," I replied smoothly. "I want all the neighbors to be there. I want a massive audience when the truth finally comes out." I spent the next few hours carefully reviewing the legal and financial files I had brought with me from my office. While my family thought I was just a bitter accountant pushing numbers on a spreadsheet, they completely failed to realize that auditing gave me access to deep, undeniable financial truths. I pulled out a thick manila folder. Inside were highly sensitive official notices from the Internal Revenue Service. These were not just standard tax returns. They were detailed audit flags proving my father had been committing federal tax fraud for half a decade by secretly claiming my house and my personal property tax payments as his own deductions. I did not dress like a victim, and I certainly did not dress like the sad, jealous spinster Kendrick claimed I was. I put on a tailored, charcoal gray designer suit that cost more than Kendrick's entire fake crypto portfolio. I paired it with sharp black heels and a minimalist gold watch. I looked exactly like what I was, a highly successful corporate executive holding all the winning cards. I walked out of the luxury hotel and requested a premium black SUV service, instructing the driver to take me back to the northern suburbs. As we cruised down the highway, I watched the familiar landscape shift from towering glass skyscrapers to manicured suburban lawns. My phone continued to buzz with hateful messages from neighbors who were currently drinking expensive champagne in my backyard, completely unaware that they were trespassing on my private property. The black SUV turned onto my street. Even from a block away, I could hear the loud, obnoxious roaring of the rented diesel generator. Cars lined both sides of the street, blocking the driveways of surrounding homes. The entire homeowner association had shown up to support the golden child and her fake entrepreneur husband. Through the side gate, I saw Kendrick standing on my back patio, wearing another ridiculous silk shirt, holding a microphone, and addressing the large crowd of neighbors. They were all clapping and cheering for him. I looked down at the thick manila folder resting on my lap. My family wanted to use the neighbors to shame me into submission. They wanted a public execution of my character. I took a deep breath, grabbed the heavy car door handle, and decided it was finally time to crash their ridiculous party. I tapped the glass partition separating me from the driver of the premium black SUV. "Pull directly into the main driveway," I instructed him, my voice perfectly steady. "Do not worry about the catering vans or the ridiculous decorations blocking the entrance. Just pull right in." The driver nodded professionally, turning the heavy luxury vehicle off the residential street and steering it straight toward my property. Through the tinted windows, I had a perfect view of the absolute spectacle my family had orchestrated. Kendrick had spared no expense with his imaginary crypto wealth. A massive white catering tent was erected on the freshly cut grass. Waiters in crisp white shirts were circulating with silver trays of champagne and expensive appetizers. An acoustic band was playing softly in the corner. But the centerpiece of this entire delusion was Kendrick himself standing on the raised wooden deck of my back patio holding a microphone. Next to him stood Audrey, wearing a flowing pastel maternity dress, looking the picture of innocent victimhood. My parents, Richard and Patricia, were positioned right behind them, smiling proudly for the neighborhood. Standing right beside Kendrick was Mr. Henderson, the notoriously strict president of the Homeowner Association. Mr. Henderson was a retired corporate executive who thrived on neighborhood gossip and strict adherence to the community guidelines. He had a microphone in his hand and was in the middle of a very passionate toast. "I want to raise a glass to Kendrick and Audrey," Mr. Henderson announced, his voice booming over the rented speakers. "This young couple has faced incredible unexpected adversity this week. It is never easy when a troubled family member loses their way and tries to tear a home apart. But Kendrick stepped up like a true provider. He kept the lights on, he kept his pregnant wife safe, and he showed us all what real family values look like in this neighborhood." The crowd of neighbors erupted into enthusiastic applause. I saw Mrs. Gable from down the street wiping a fake tear from her eye. My mother beamed, patting Kendrick on the shoulder. They were absolutely reveling in the false narrative they had spun. They thought they had successfully rewritten history, painting me as the villain and themselves as the triumphant heroes of the suburbs. I looked at the driver. "Take us all the way up to the front walkway," I said. "But ma'am," the driver replied hesitantly, glancing at the sprawling lawn. "There are plastic decorations lining the entire edge of the driveway. I will definitely run them over if I pull up that far." "That is exactly what I want you to do," I told him, a cold smile touching my lips. The driver shrugged and pressed the gas pedal. The massive, heavy engine of the black SUV roared loudly, completely drowning out the acoustic band on the patio. The vehicle surged forward, hopping the slight curb of the driveway. Kendrick had lined the entire concrete path with dozens of tacky bright pink plastic lawn flamingos, a clear violation of the very HOA guidelines Mr. Henderson usually strictly enforced. The heavy tires of the SUV hit the first plastic flamingo with a sharp, loud crack. Then another. Crack. Snap. Crunch. The vehicle rolled relentlessly forward, crushing the expensive pink decorations into sharp plastic splinters under its massive weight. The aggressive, destructive sound echoed across the entire front yard, violently interrupting the polite applause of the neighborhood crowd. The acoustic band abruptly stopped playing. People gasped and spilled their champagne. Mr. Henderson dropped his microphone, creating a horrible screech of feedback through the rented speakers. Every single head in the yard turned simultaneously to stare at the sleek black vehicle that had just aggressively invaded their private celebration. On the patio, the smug smiles completely vanished from my family faces. Kendrick dropped his hands to his sides, his jaw tight with sudden anger. Audrey gasped and grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with panic. My father took a step back, his face draining of color as he recognized the high-end vehicle. They all knew I did not own a car like this, but they also knew I was the only person bold enough to crash their party. The driver threw the SUV into park and quickly stepped out to open my door. I smoothed down the lapels of my tailored charcoal gray designer suit, grabbed the thick manila folder from the leather seat, and stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. I adjusted my posture, standing tall and projecting absolute corporate authority. I closed the heavy car door behind me with a solid, echoing thud. The entire front yard went completely dead silent. Not a single neighbor dared to breathe as I began my slow, confident walk toward the terrified group standing on my patio. The entire front yard went completely dead silent. Not a single neighbor dared to breathe as I began my slow, confident walk toward the terrified group standing on my patio. My black heels clicked sharply against the concrete walkway, occasionally crushing a stray piece of bright pink plastic left over from Kendrick and his ruined lawn flamingos. The loud, obnoxious humming of the rented diesel generator was the only sound cutting through the thick, tense air of the neighborhood. Kendrick was the first one to break the frozen tableau. Realizing that his entire wealthy facade was crumbling in front of the homeowner association, his shock quickly mutated into aggressive defensive rage. He jumped down from the wooden deck, landing heavily on the grass, and marched toward me. He puffed out his chest, using his tall, athletic frame to try and physically intimidate me. He stopped just a few feet away, invading my personal space. His face contorted with anger. "What the hell are you doing here?" Clara Kendrick hissed, keeping his voice just low enough so the neighbors in the back could not hear him clearly. "You are trespassing. You have absolutely no right to show up at my house and destroy my property. Get back in that rented car and leave before I have the police drag you away." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply looked up at him, my expression completely bored. "I am not going anywhere, Kendrick," I replied smoothly, making sure my voice carried across the silent yard. "And we both know the police are not coming. We established that last night, did we not?" Before Kendrick could respond, my mother Patricia launched into her highly rehearsed victim routine. She pushed her way to the front of the patio, burying her face in her hands and letting out a loud, theatrical sob that was perfectly pitched for maximum sympathy. "How can you do this to us, Clara?" my mother wailed, looking directly at the crowd of neighbors. Mrs. Gable and Mr. Henderson watched her with wide eyes. My mother pointed a trembling finger at me. "We gave you everything. We raised you. And you repay us by plunging our home into freezing darkness. You tried to freeze your pregnant sister. You are sick, Clara. You need psychological help. Please just leave our family alone." A low murmur rippled through the crowd of caterers and neighbors. Mr. Henderson, the homeowner association president, actually took a step forward, puffing his chest out as if he were preparing to intervene and physically escort me off the premises. They were all eating it up. The wealthy suburbanites loved nothing more than a tragic family scandal, and my mother was giving them an award-winning performance. Audrey leaned against the wooden railing, clutching her stomach and producing fake tears to support the narrative, fully playing the role of the terrified, expectant mother. Kendrick felt the energy of the crowd shifting to his side, and his arrogance immediately flared back to life. He pointed an accusatory finger right at my face, raising his voice so every single person in the yard could hear his insults clearly. "Do not listen to a word she says," Kendrick shouted to the audience. "She is completely unhinged. This is all just pure toxic jealousy. Clara is a bitter 33-year-old spinster who cannot get a man to look at her twice. She spends all her time crunching numbers in a lonely cubicle. She sees Audrey and me building a beautiful legacy, bringing a new baby into this world, and it drives her absolutely crazy. She wants to destroy our happiness because she knows she will never have a family of her own. She is pathetic." He sneered at me, crossing his arms over his expensive designer silk shirt. "You thought cutting the power would break us," he mocked. "But look around, Clara. I provided for my family. I brought the power back. I funded this amazing party. You have no power here anymore. You are nothing but a sad, jealous outsider. Now turn around and walk away before you embarrass yourself any further." I let him finish his grand, pathetic speech. I let the neighbors whisper and cast their judgmental stares. I let my mother continue her fake, dramatic sobbing. I let them all dig the hole as deep as humanly possible. I did not defend my relationship status. I did not scream about how I had been paying their bills for the last 5 years. I did not waste my breath arguing with a man who bought his clothes on credit cards he could not afford to pay off. As a senior auditor, I knew that when a fraudster is speaking, the absolute best strategy is to let them talk until they hang themselves with their own words. Instead, I completely ignored Kendrick. I looked right past his glaring face, looking straight through him as if he were entirely invisible, and locked my eyes directly onto my father, Richard. He was standing near the back of the patio, trying to hide behind Mr. Henderson. His face was pale and he was sweating profusely despite the chilly winter air. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew I did not bluff. I raised my right hand and slowly tapped my index finger against the thick manila folder I was carrying. Tap, tap, tap. I raised my right hand and slowly tapped my index finger against the thick manila folder I was carrying. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was quiet, but carried an undeniable weight in the sudden silence of the yard. I kept my eyes locked on my father, watching the remaining color drain from his face until he looked like a ghost standing in his own backyard. "You all seem to think I came here today to argue about utilities or to beg for a room in my own house." I began, my voice clear, carrying effortlessly over the low hum of the generator. "But I am not here for that. I am here because my professional obligations require me to inform my tenants of a very serious impending legal situation." I slowly undid the string closure of the manila folder. I did not rush. I let the anticipation hang in the air, thick and suffocating. My father took another small step backward, his eyes fixed on the folder as if it were a live grenade. "For the past 5 years, my father has told everyone in this neighborhood that he is a successful man providing for his family," I said, addressing the crowd but never looking away from him. "He told you he graciously allowed his single daughter to live under his roof paying a modest rent. But as a senior certified public accountant, I find it incredibly dangerous when people confuse fiction with their official tax returns." I pulled out a stack of crisp official documents featuring the unmistakable seal of the United States Treasury. I held them up so the closest neighbors, including the nosy HOA president, Mr. Henderson, could see the heavy black text. What my father conveniently forgot to mention to his friends, and apparently to his own son-in-law, is that I do not pay rent. I continued, my voice steady and unforgiving. "I pay the property taxes. I pay the homeowner association fees. I pay the premium insurance. And I pay them because my late grandfather put this entire estate into an irrevocable trust, naming me as the sole trustee and beneficiary. My father does not own this house. He never has." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Mrs. Gable covered her mouth in shock. Mr. Henderson stared at the papers in my hand, his previous righteous anger completely deflating. Kendrick whipped his head around to look at my father. "Richard, what is she talking about?" Kendrick demanded, his fake confidence completely shattering. "Tell them she is lying." My father said nothing. He just stared at the ground, his hands shaking at his sides. My mother had stopped crying and was now looking at my father with genuine panic. "But not owning the house is not the crime here today," I announced, raising my voice to ensure every single person on the lawn heard the final blow. "The crime is that for the last 5 consecutive years, Richard has been secretly claiming my property tax payments as his own personal deductions on his federal tax returns. He has been illegally inflating his financial standing to secure credit cards and personal loans to fund this ridiculous lifestyle, all while defrauding the federal government." The silence in the yard was absolute. The kind of silence that only happens when a massive, undeniable truth completely obliterates a long-standing lie. "Because I am the legal trustee. I received a notification this morning," I said, pulling the final, most damaging document from the folder. "It is an official notice of a comprehensive federal audit. The Internal Revenue Service has flagged all of his returns for severe discrepancies." I looked directly at my father, who was now trembling visibly. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. He had thrown me out into the street. He had called the police on me with malicious intent. He had allowed his golden child to smear my name across the community. Now it was time for him to pay the ultimate price. "I hope you enjoyed the champagne, Dad," I said loudly, ensuring my voice was perfectly clear. "Because the IRS Criminal Investigation Division will be visiting you on Tuesday. I highly suggest you spend whatever money Kendrick has left on a very good federal defense attorney." The neighbors gasped simultaneously and immediately started backing away. The wealthy suburbanites who had just been cheering for my family suddenly treated them like they had a highly contagious disease. No one in that neighborhood wanted to be associated with federal tax fraud. Mr. Henderson quickly set his champagne glass down on a nearby table and practically sprinted toward the side gate. The catering staff stopped serving and nervously began packing up their expensive silver trays. My family was being socially excommunicated in real time. Within seconds, the lavish backyard party transformed into a chaotic evacuation. Mr. Henderson did not even bother to say goodbye. He power-walked down the driveway, completely ignoring my father, who reached out a trembling hand toward him. The other neighbors followed suit, a stampede of wealthy suburbanites, desperate to escape the blast radius of a federal tax audit. Car doors began slamming all up and down the street. Engines roared to life as people scrambled to back out of their parking spots, abandoning the half-eaten appetizers and the expensive floral arrangements. The acoustic band quietly packed their instruments into their velvet-lined cases and slipped out the side gate without asking for their final payment. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one. On the patio, my mother was completely falling apart. Patricia clutched her chest, taking short, ragged gasps of air. She staggered backward and collapsed into a white wicker chair, hyperventilating as she watched her precious social reputation evaporate before her very eyes. For decades, she had carefully curated the image of the perfect, wealthy family. Now she was the wife of a confessed federal tax cheat, publicly humiliated in front of the very people she spent her entire life trying to impress. Richard was completely frozen. He looked like a man who had just been handed a terminal diagnosis. He stared blankly at the driveway as the last few cars sped away, leaving the yard littered with crushed pink plastic and abandoned champagne flutes. His grand illusion of being the benevolent patriarch was dead. The Internal Revenue Service was not a neighborhood gossip group he could manipulate. It was a massive, unforgiving federal entity, and he knew they would freeze every single bank account he had by Tuesday morning. I stood perfectly still, watching the destruction of their lies. I felt a profound sense of closure. I had delivered the truth, exposed the fraud, and reclaimed my dignity. I was fully prepared to turn around, walk back to my waiting black SUV, and leave them to deal with the federal consequences of their own actions. But the silence that followed the departure of the neighbors was suddenly broken by a highly unexpected sound. It started as a low chuckle, a deep, vibrating sound coming from the wooden deck. I looked over and saw Kendrick standing near the catering table. His head was tilted back and his shoulders were shaking. The chuckle quickly escalated into a loud, maniacal laugh. It was a jarring, unhinged sound that echoed over the obnoxious hum of the rented diesel generator. Audrey looked at her husband with wide, terrified eyes. "Kendrick, what are you doing?" she whispered, grabbing his arm. "Stop laughing! Did you not just hear what she said about the audit?" Kendrick shook her hand off roughly. He wiped a tear of mirth from his eye and walked to the edge of the patio, looking down at me with an expression of absolute supreme arrogance. He was not scared. He was not intimidated by the IRS documents in my hand. In fact, he looked like a man who had just won the lottery. "You really think you did something here today, do you not, Clara?" Kendrick sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You rolled up in your rented luxury car, crushed my decorations, and scared away a bunch of stuck-up old people with some tax paperwork. You think you completely ruined us." He let out another sharp, mocking laugh. He pointed a finger at my father, who was still staring blankly at the grass. "Let me tell you a little secret," Clara Kendrick said, his tone turning dark and victorious. "I do not care about your father and his stupid tax problems. That is his mess to clean up. Let the federal government audit him. Let them throw him in a white-collar prison for all I care. He is old news." My mother let out a loud, horrified gasp from her wicker chair. "Kendrick, how can you say that?" she cried. "Shut up," Patricia Kendrick snapped, without even looking at her. He kept his eyes locked intensely on mine. His chest was puffed out, radiating the foolish confidence of a man who firmly believed he was the smartest person in the room. "You came here to gloat about an audit because you think it protects this house," Kendrick continued, stepping down onto the grass and closing the distance between us. "You think flashing that irrevocable trust makes you untouchable. But you are incredibly naive, Clara. You spend too much time reading accounting books and not enough time understanding how the real world operates." I maintained my blank corporate expression, though my mind was racing. What exactly was he getting at? Kendrick stopped just a few feet away from me. He shoved his hands into the pockets of his designer slacks and flashed a predatory, wicked smirk. "You think you are so smart," Clara Kendrick whispered, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. "But you are too late. I already used the deed." I stared at him. my face remaining perfectly impassive while my mind rapidly processed his words. Used the deed. As a financial auditor, I had heard every ridiculous excuse and half-baked scheme imaginable, but Kendrick was about to set a completely new standard for absolute financial ignorance. What exactly do you mean by that? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Kendrick laughed again, a loud barking sound that grated against my ears. He took another step forward, practically vibrating with the thrill of his own perceived genius. I mean that before we even went down to the county clerk office on Friday afternoon, I made a high-quality digital scan of the quitclaim deed, he bragged, throwing his arms wide open. The deed with your signature on it, the one explicitly stating you were handing the property over to Audrey and me. I kept my arms relaxed at my sides, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me react. And what exactly did you do with that scan, Kendrick? I leveraged my assets, Clara, he said loudly, using corporate buzzwords he clearly did not understand. You see, traditional banks are incredibly slow. They are archaic. They take weeks to process a loan, run credit checks, and send out appraisers. But the modern financial world moves fast. I found a private short-term lending group online, a hard money syndicate that specializes in rapid liquidity for high-net-worth investors like myself. He turned to look at Audrey, who was watching him with a mixture of confusion and desperate pride. I showed them the scanned deed. Kendrick continued, projecting his voice so my terrified parents could hear his brilliant strategy. I proved to them that a massive colonial estate was in the process of being transferred entirely into my name. Because I am a visionary, they did not wait for the slow, lazy county clerks to stamp the final paperwork. They approved my collateral based on the scanned legal document and executed a rapid wire transfer. My mother gasped from her white wicker chair. Kendrick, she stammered, her voice shaking violently. How much money did you borrow against our house? It is not your house anymore, Patricia Kendrick snapped back, shooting her a look of pure disgust. Then he turned his arrogant smirk back to me. $200,000, Clara. I secured a $200,000 cash advance, using the deed as collateral. The sheer magnitude of his stupidity hung heavy in the cold afternoon air. My father looked like he was about to pass out on the patio. $200,000. Richard had risked a federal prison sentence for tax fraud, only to have his precious son-in-law secretly mortgage the house out from under him using a forged document. The color drained from my father's face until he looked completely gray. And where exactly is that money now, I asked, knowing perfectly well that someone like Kendrick would never keep cash sitting safely in a traditional savings account. Kendrick puffed out his chest, his eyes gleaming with the manic, unpredictable energy of a chronic gambler who had just bet his entire life savings on red. It is already fully invested. I dumped the entire $200,000 into a brand new, decentralized cryptocurrency token that launched on the Asian markets last night. It is a revolutionary blockchain project with incredible momentum. By next week, that initial investment will easily quadruple. I will pay off the ridiculous loan, take full ownership of the house, and Audrey and I will be sitting on nearly $1 million in pure untaxed digital equity. He began pacing back and forth on the grass, clearly high on his own delusional fantasies. You thought you could control us with your little utility bills and your tax threats, Clara. You thought you could just kick us out and keep the family wealth for yourself. But I just beat you at your own financial game. You are just a boring corporate accountant punching numbers on a keyboard. I am a modern financial pioneer. He stopped pacing and stepped so close to me I could smell the expensive cloying cologne he had bought with stolen credit cards. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, and lowered his voice into a menacing, theatrical whisper. You can wave those IRS papers around all you want. Clara, Kendrick sneered, his breath hot against the crisp winter air. You can cry to the police about forged signatures and fake notary stamps, but the digital contract is already signed. The wire transfer is complete. The money is already in my wallet. If you take the house back, you take the debt with it. The profound silence that followed Kendrick and his arrogant declaration was thick enough to cut with a knife. For a few seconds, the only sound was the obnoxious roaring of the rented diesel generator echoing off the brick walls of the colonial house. I stood perfectly still, watching the absolute horror slowly wash over the faces of my parents. They had fully supported Kendrick when they thought his little forgery scheme would simply secure them a free place to live. But hearing that he had secretly taken out a massive mortgage without telling them completely shattered their toxic alliance. "You did what my father demanded," his voice cracking violently. Richard took a step toward Kendrick, his hands balled into tight fists. The fear of the federal audit was momentarily eclipsed by the sheer betrayal he was experiencing. "We agreed to transfer the title to secure the property from Clara. We never agreed to let you borrow money against the estate." Kendrick rolled his eyes, visibly annoyed that his supposed genius was being questioned by the father-in-law he clearly viewed as a financial failure. "Do not be so incredibly dramatic," Richard Kendrick scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "It is called leveraging dead assets. That house was just sitting there doing absolutely nothing. I put the equity to work. When the crypto token skyrockets next week, I will pay off the loan and we will be rich. You should be thanking me on your knees." "Thanking you," my mother shrieked, jumping up from the white wicker chair. Patricia pushed past Audrey, her face red and distorted with pure panic. "You stole $200,000 against the house we live in. What if your stupid internet money fails Kendrick? What happens to us then? The lenders will foreclose on the property. We will be thrown out onto the street." Kendrick glared at my mother, his fake charm completely dropping to reveal the nasty, selfish grifter he truly was. "Oh, shut up, Patricia," he snapped viciously. "You are living in a fantasy world. You just heard Clara say the IRS is coming for you on Tuesday. Your husband committed federal tax fraud for 5 years. They are going to freeze every single bank account you have. They will garnish your pensions. You are entirely broke. I am the only person in this family who actually has any real liquidity right now. You need my investment to save you from going to prison." "You arrogant fool," my father yelled, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. "You used a fake deed. If those lenders find out the paperwork is completely fraudulent, they will not just foreclose. They will send people after us. You gave our home address to a shadow lending syndicate. You put my pregnant daughter in extreme danger just so you could play at being a day trader." The argument exploded into a full-blown screaming match right there on the ruined front lawn. All the polite suburban etiquette was completely abandoned as the thieves violently turned on each other. My father lunged forward, grabbing the collar of Kendrick's expensive silk shirt. Kendrick shoved my father backward so hard that Richard stumbled and nearly fell into the crushed pink plastic flamingos. Audrey began to scream hysterically, jumping between the two men. "Stop it!" Audrey cried, grabbing Kendrick by the arm. "Do not touch my father. Kendrick, tell me you did not really risk our entire future on a digital coin. Tell me the money is safe in a real bank." Kendrick ripped his arm away from his pregnant wife, his eyes wild and furious. "You are all a bunch of ungrateful cowards," he shouted at them. "I took a massive risk to elevate this family to the next tier of wealth, and you are acting like terrified peasants. I am the man of this house now. I control the capital." I stood entirely apart from the chaotic screaming match, holding my thick manila folder perfectly untouched by the massive explosion I had just set off. It was a truly magnificent sight. For 5 years, they had constantly belittled me, undermined my achievements, and formed a united front to make me feel like a worthless outsider in my own home. Now faced with the very real consequences of their own greed, their toxic loyalty had completely dissolved in less than 60 seconds. They were tearing each other to absolute pieces, desperate to save themselves. I let them scream and shove each other for a few more moments, savoring the absolute destruction of their fake, perfect family image. Then I slowly raised my hands. I brought my palms together in a loud, deliberate clap. Then another and another. The sharp, rhythmic sound of my slow clap cut directly through their panicked yelling. They all froze mid-argument, whipping their heads around to look at me as if they had completely forgotten I was still standing there. I lowered my hands, a genuine smile of amusement spreading across my face. My parents and Audrey stared at me in absolute shock, their chests heaving from their screaming match. Kendrick stood rigidly on the grass, his silk shirt wrinkled from where my father had just violently grabbed him. He tried to maintain his arrogant glare, but I could see the tiny muscle in his jaw twitching with sudden uncertainty. "Bravo, Kendrick," I said, my voice echoing clearly over the humming of the rented diesel generator. "That was a truly spectacular performance. You actually stood on my lawn and convinced yourself that you outsmarted the entire financial system with a cheap desktop scanner and a fake rubber stamp. You think you are the ultimate financial visionary, do you not? Kendrick puffed out his chest, desperately trying to recover his shattered dignity. I did outsmart the system, he spat back, though his voice lacked the confidence it held just moments ago. The money is in my digital wallet. The blockchain does not lie, Clara. You are furious because I found a rapid liquidity loophole in your little trust fund. I beat you. I let out a soft sigh, shaking my head in sheer disbelief. It is genuinely terrifying how little you understand about finance, I replied, stepping closer to the patio. Let me break this down for you, using very simple concepts, so you can comprehend the magnitude of the grave you just dug for yourself. As a senior certified public accountant, I handle corporate compliance, risk assessment, and legal asset protection every single day. I know exactly how underwriting works. I held up my hand, counting off the points on my fingers. First, this house is not just a standard piece of residential property. It is legally bound within an irrevocable trust. The key word there is irrevocable. That means it cannot be altered, sold, or leveraged by anyone except the legally appointed trustee. That is me. When a person applies for a legitimate mortgage or a home equity line of credit, the very first thing a real financial institution does is initiate a comprehensive title search through the county property records. My father groaned softly, burying his face in his hands. He knew exactly where this was going. A real bank does not just look at a scanned piece of paper you emailed them from your laptop. I continued, my voice sharp and authoritative. They require an underwriter. They require official certified documents with verified recording stamps from the county clerk. Most importantly, if a property is legally held in a trust, the bank requires the trustee to be physically present. To get a loan on this house, I would have to sit at a massive mahogany table, provide my government identification, and sign the loan documents in blue ink in front of their own registered notary. Kendrick swallowed hard. His eyes darted nervously toward Audrey, who was clutching her stomach and looking at him with pure terror. But I got the money, Kendrick insisted, his voice cracking slightly as the reality began to set in. They wired the funds this morning. They saw the deed and they wired the funds immediately. Yes, they did, I agreed smoothly, enjoying the absolute panic washing over his face. Because the people you contacted online are not a bank. They are not a federally insured credit union. They are not bound by the strict federal regulations of the traditional financial system you were just bragging about bypassing. Legitimate lenders avoid unverified assets like the plague because it represents an unacceptable risk profile. They would have flagged your fake deed in 5 minutes and reported you for wire fraud. The silence on the patio was deafening. The golden child and her fake entrepreneur husband were finally realizing the catastrophic trap they had walked blindly into. You bragged about finding a private short-term lending group, I said, taking one final step toward him. You were so incredibly proud to loudly announce to everyone here that you bypassed the banks, a hard money syndicate that specializes in rapid liquidity and did not care about slow county clerks or proper title searches. Do you know why they did not care about the paperwork, Kendrick? Do you know why they handed you $200,000 without running a legitimate background check? Because they do not rely on the legal court system to collect their debts when you default. I watched the horrifying realization finally click in his eyes. The cocky crypto investor was rapidly transforming into a terrified little boy who had just touched a burning hot stove. Which means, I smiled coldly, looking right into his panicked eyes. You did not borrow from a bank, Kendrick. You borrowed from a hard money lender, loan sharks. Kendrick stumbled backward as if I had physically struck him. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking sickly and pale under the afternoon sun. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His arrogant smirk was completely gone, replaced by the raw, unadulterated terror of a man who suddenly realized he was standing on a landmine and had just heard the click. Do not call them that, Kendrick finally managed to whisper, his voice shaking. They are a private liquidity syndicate. They have a website. They sent me digital contracts. They are not criminals. I let out a short, harsh laugh. A website does not make them a federally regulated bank, Kendrick. Anyone can build a website in an hour. Let me explain exactly how this works, since you clearly skipped reading the fine print of your own destruction. Those private lenders do not care about the legal title of this house. They never did. They knew the deed you sent them was sketchy, which is exactly why they charged you an astronomical interest rate and demanded an immediate signature on a personal promissory note. My father let out a quiet, pathetic whimper, leaning heavily against the wooden railing of the patio. When you default on this massive loan, I continued, my voice cold and surgical, they are not going to file a civil foreclosure lawsuit in the county courthouse. They are not going to wait 6 months for a judge to review the trust documents. They do not care that I own the house or that your deed was forged. They only care about one thing. The name on the promissory note. Your name, Kendrick. Audrey began to cry harder, her hands trembling as she grabbed her husband by the arm. Kendrick, please tell me you did not sign a personal guarantee, she begged him. Kendrick could not even look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on me, his breathing shallow and rapid. They gave you $200,000, I said, taking a step closer to ensure he heard every single word. And they expect to be paid back with heavy interest. When they come to collect, they will not be sending polite letters in the mail. They will be sending people, dangerous people who specialize in extracting money from arrogant fools who think they can outsmart the underworld. And the best part, Kendrick, is that you cannot even go to the police for protection. Why not? Audrey shrieked, her voice echoing across the empty yard. We can call the police. We can tell them he was tricked. Because if he goes to the authorities, I explained calmly, looking at my hysterical sister, he will have to admit exactly how he got the money in the first place. He will have to confess to forging my signature on a legal document and transmitting it electronically across state lines to secure a loan. That is federal wire fraud and bank fraud. The moment he walks into a police station, he will be arrested and charged with multiple felonies. He has completely trapped himself. My mother let out a sharp cry and physically stepped away from Kendrick. She looked at him as if he were a live explosive device. Richard, we need to leave. My mother panicked. We cannot be here. Those people have our home address. They will come here looking for him. My parents were completely abandoning him. The man they had just praised as the ultimate provider was now nothing more than a massive, dangerous liability. But Kendrick was not ready to surrender. A desperate, wild light suddenly flared in his eyes. He grabbed his phone from his pocket, his fingers fumbling with the screen. It does not matter, Kendrick yelled, his voice cracking with pure desperation. You are trying to scare me, Clara, but it is not going to work. I do not need to go to the police. I do not need your house anymore. I told you I invested the money. The crypto market is open 24 hours a day. The token I bought is projected to skyrocket. I will just liquidate my position right now. I will pay back the loan today and keep the profit. You cannot defeat me. I watched him frantically tap his screen, opening his digital trading application. I felt a cold, deep satisfaction settle into my bones. As a financial auditor, it was my job to track volatile market trends. I knew exactly which token he had dumped all that stolen money into. I would not bother checking that portfolio, Kendrick, I said softly. He froze, his thumb hovering over the bright screen. What did you say? He demanded. I checked the international markets this morning over breakfast. I replied, my voice completely devoid of pity. That revolutionary new token you bought into was a classic pump and dump scheme. The developers pulled all the liquidity out at 4 in the morning. It pulled Kendrick. The coin crashed to absolute zero. You owe $200,000 to dangerous people and your digital wallet is completely empty. You have absolutely nothing. You have absolutely nothing. Kendrick did not argue with me this time. He did not puff out his chest or throw around his ridiculous buzzwords. He simply looked down at his phone. His trembling thumb tapped the screen, refreshing his digital portfolio application once, twice, 3 times. I watched the reflection of the bright screen illuminate his terrified face. The line graph on his trading app had flatlined. The balance at the top of the screen displayed a bold, undeniable 0. The rug pull was complete. The anonymous developers had drained the liquidity pool, taking his borrowed $200,000 with them. Kendrick dropped his phone. It hit the concrete patio with a sharp crack, the screen shattering instantly. He fell to his knees on the grass, clutching his head, a pathetic whimper escaping his throat. Audrey stood frozen on the deck, her hands hovering over her pregnant stomach. Her perfect pastel maternity dress suddenly looked ridiculous against the backdrop of absolute financial devastation. The carefully constructed facade of the golden child was crumbling before my eyes. For her entire life, Audrey had been shielded from severe consequences. My parents had always bailed her out of every minor inconvenience. She married Kendrick because he promised her a life of effortless luxury, a life where she could play pretend on social media while someone else footed the bill. Now she was staring at the reality of being married to a broke, fraudulent gambler who owed a massive fortune to violent criminals. Audrey slowly walked down the wooden steps. She stopped right in front of Kendrick, who was still kneeling in the grass, muttering incoherently about market fluctuations and temporary dips. "You lost it," Audrey whispered, her voice barely audible over the loud humming generator. "You lost absolutely everything we had." "Audrey, baby, listen to me," Kendrick stammered, looking up at her with wild, desperate eyes. "It is just a minor setback. The market is incredibly volatile right now. I can borrow more. I know a guy who can give us an advance to cover the spread. We just need to double down and wait for the bounce." The sheer delusion of his words finally snapped something deep inside Audrey. The sweet, innocent victim persona she had played for the neighbors completely evaporated instantly, replaced by a vicious, unhinged rage. Audrey raised her right hand and slapped Kendrick violently across the face. The sharp, stinging crack echoed across the empty yard. Kendrick recoiled, clutching his cheek in pure shock. My mother gasped loudly, covering her mouth, but she did not step forward to intervene. My father just stared blankly at the lawn, entirely broken by the sheer volume of disasters unfolding around him. "You stupid, arrogant loser!" Audrey screamed, her face turning bright red. Her voice was unrecognizable, a shrill, guttural shriek of pure panic. "You promised me we were going to be rich. You promised me we were taking this house. You forged a legal document and took cash from criminals. You ruined my life, Kendrick. You completely ruined my future." She hit him again, her fists pounding against his shoulders as he cowered on the lawn. "I am pregnant," Audrey sobbed hysterically, her anger quickly giving way to raw terror. "I am having a baby, and you just put a massive target on our backs. Those loan sharks are going to come here looking for you. They are going to hurt us. I hate you. I absolutely hate you." Kendrick did not fight back. He just curled into a tight ball on the crushed pink plastic flamingos, completely humiliated and destroyed. Audrey backed away from him, hyperventilating. She looked wildly around the yard, her eyes darting from the abandoned catering tables to the rented generator and finally to our terrified parents. But she knew Richard and Patricia were useless now. The federal auditors were coming for my father, and my mother had never successfully handled a real crisis in her entire life. Then Audrey slowly turned and looked directly at me. I was still standing calmly on the walkway, holding my thick manila folder, completely untouched by the chaos. I was the senior certified public accountant. I was the one with the six-figure corporate salary. I was the one who actually owned the million-dollar colonial estate. In Audrey's twisted, privileged mind, I had always been the ultimate safety net, the dependable workhorse who existed solely to clean up the reckless messes of the golden child. Audrey stumbled across the grass toward me. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She stopped just a foot away, her hands shaking violently. "Clara," Audrey cried, reaching out to grab the sleeve of my suit. "Please, Clara. You have savings. You have to bail us out of debt." I looked at my younger sister. Her manicured fingers gripped my charcoal suit jacket like a drowning woman clinging to a life raft. The audacity of her request was staggering. After treating me like a second-class citizen and making a crying video claiming I wanted to freeze her unborn child, she actually expected me to write a check to save her fraudulent husband from the violent consequences of his arrogance. I firmly detached her hands from my sleeve. I stepped back, smoothing my jacket. "I am not your personal bank, Audrey," I said, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "I did not forge a federal document. I did not borrow from a criminal syndicate. I did not gamble my future on a digital coin. You blindly supported him while he tried to steal my property and throw me into the freezing cold. You made this bed and now you have to lie in it. Audrey let out a loud wail and collapsed onto the grass next to Kendrick, burying her face in her hands, as the reality of her shattered future finally crushed her. Seeing her golden child broken snapped my mother out of her paralysis. Patricia rushed forward, her designer heels sinking into the soft soil. She grabbed my father by the arm, violently jerking him forward. Richard stumbled, his face still gray and slack with terror from the impending tax audit. "Clara, please," my mother begged, her voice high-pitched and hysterical. "You cannot let this happen to us. Those loan sharks will take the house. They will come here and hurt all of us. You have the money. You are a senior certified public accountant. You have a massive salary and investments. You can pay them off and save your sister. You can easily hire a top-tier defense lawyer to help your father fight the IRS." I stared at the woman who had packed my belongings into cheap garbage bags just 1 week ago. "You want me to drain my life savings to cover federal tax fraud and underground loan shark debts?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. My parents did not hesitate. The sheer desperation completely overrode whatever remaining pride they possessed. Right there on the front lawn, amidst the crushed pink plastic flamingos and the abandoned catering tables, my mother and father fell to their knees. It was a shocking, pathetic sight. The proud, arrogant patriarch and the status-obsessed matriarch kneeling in the dirt in front of the daughter they had always despised. My father lowered his head, his shoulders shaking with pathetic silent sobs. "Clara, we are so incredibly sorry," my mother cried, clasping her hands together in front of her chest. "We made a terrible mistake. We were just trying to help Kendrick and Audrey get a good start. But we are family. We are your parents. You cannot abandon us to criminals and federal investigators. We are blood, Clara. We are blood." I looked down at them kneeling in the grass. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt, no familial obligation. The well of my empathy had run completely dry. Instead of answering her plea, I reached into the interior pocket of my blazer and pulled out my smartphone. I unlocked the screen, opened the camera, and switched it to video mode. I pointed the lens directly at my parents kneeling in the grass and hit the red record button. "What are you doing?" my mother gasped, trying to shield her face with her hands. "I am documenting reality," I replied smoothly, keeping the camera steady. Last night, Audrey posted a highly manipulative video to the homeowner association group, crying fake tears and calling me an unhinged monster. She tried to destroy my reputation. So now I am going to publicly record the actual truth. I want a clear video record of the people who tried to steal my house kneeling in the dirt and begging for my money. "Put the damn phone away, Clara," my father pleaded weakly, not daring to look up at the camera lens. "Please, just help us. We are blood." I zoomed in slightly on his trembling figure. "Blood?" I asked, my voice ringing out with absolute authority over the loud humming of the rented diesel generator. "Last Sunday, you comfortably sat at a dining table that I paid for. You threw my house key into my dinner plate. You handed me a cheap suitcase. You looked me dead in the eye and told me that I was nothing to you. You told me I was taking up space and ordered me to leave." I lowered the phone slightly, making sure to capture the absolute terror in their eyes. "I am not abandoning my family." I smiled coldly. "I am just following your orders." I pressed stop, saving the video to my cloud storage. I slipped the heavy phone back into my tailored suit jacket pocket. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the continuous mechanical drone of the rented generator and the muffled sobs of my mother. My father remained on his knees, staring at the crushed pink plastic flamingos scattered across the lawn. He looked entirely broken, a hollow shell of the arrogant man who threw my house key into my dinner plate last week. I opened the thick manila folder one last time. One final document was tucked safely behind the federal tax audit notices. I pulled it out. It was formally drafted and stamped by Lawyer Harrison earlier that morning. I stepped forward and held the crisp, white document out toward my father. Richard did not reach for it. He just stared at the paper as if it were laced with poison. His hands remained limply at his sides, trembling slightly. "Take it, Dad," I commanded, my voice sharp and entirely devoid of warmth. Consider this my final contribution. Trembling violently, my father took the document. His eyes darted across the bold letters at the top of the page. He struggled to comprehend the legal terminology through his panic. "What is this?" my father asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What more could you possibly do to us?" "That is an official 3-day pay or quit notice," I explained calmly, making sure Audrey and Kendrick could hear every word. "You see, when you kicked me out last Sunday, you explicitly told me that I was a tenant who had worn out her welcome. You claimed I was taking up space. You wanted to play the strict landlord evicting a useless renter. I simply decided to hold you to your own standard." My mother stopped crying and looked up, her tear-streaked face twisting in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "For 5 years, I paid the property taxes, homeowner association fees, and insurance premiums out of my own pocket," I said. "You told Kendrick and Audrey that I was paying you rent. We all know I never paid a single dime for living in that guest bedroom. Since you occupy $1 million estate belonging entirely to my irrevocable trust, and you have no legal ownership, you are the tenants." I pointed to the second paragraph of the legal document my father was holding. "Lawyer Harrison conducted a market analysis of residential leasing rates in this specific wealthy suburb," I continued. "The fair market rental value for a 5-bedroom, fully furnished colonial estate with a heated swimming pool is exactly $3,000 a month. You have lived in my property completely rent-free for 60 consecutive months." My father gasped, his eyes widening in absolute horror as he did the mental math. 60 months multiplied by $3,000 equals exactly $180,000, I stated clearly, watching the devastating realization crush whatever was left of his spirit. "I am charging you retroactively for 5 years of unpaid fair market rent. I am legally permitted to do this because there was never a signed lease agreement waiving your rental obligations. You simply squatted in my trust asset. You cannot be serious," Audrey shrieked from the patio steps, scrambling to her feet. "You cannot charge your own parents rent. That is illegal. You are just making this up to torture us." "It is perfectly legal, Audrey," I replied without even glancing in her direction. "Lawyer Harrison made absolutely sure every single clause fully complies with strict Texas real estate law. A judge will rubber stamp this eviction before you even have time to pack your bags." My mother grabbed my father by the arm, shaking him violently. "Richard, tell her she cannot do this. Tell her we do not have that kind of money. We do not even have a fraction of that money." My father could not speak. He just stared blankly at the staggering financial figure printed boldly at the bottom of the page. $180,000. It was an absolute death sentence. With his impending federal tax audit, his frozen accounts, and Kendrick owing $200,000 to an underground criminal syndicate, they were buried under a mountain of catastrophic debt they could never escape. I adjusted my charcoal gray blazer, preparing to leave. I had delivered the absolute truth. I had dismantled their lies. I had secured my freedom. "You wanted me out of your house," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the ruined front yard. "Now I want you out of mine. You have 72 hours to pay me $180,000 in cash, or the sheriff removes you by force." The 72 hours passed exactly as I knew they would, slowly, painfully, and without a single miracle to save them. By Wednesday morning, the deadline had officially expired. They had not raised a single dime. My father had his bank accounts frozen by the Internal Revenue Service. My mother had no personal savings. Audrey had no actual income. And Kendrick had blown his stolen $200,000 on a dead digital token. They were completely broke. At exactly 9 in the morning, I pulled up to the curb of the Colonial Estate in my premium rideshare vehicle. Right behind me were 2 heavy white patrol vehicles belonging to the Travis County Sheriff Department. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the cold morning pavement. I stepped out of the car holding my authorized eviction paperwork. The lead sheriff deputy, a tall, no-nonsense man, walked up to the front door and knocked loudly. It was the heavy, undeniable knock of the law. My father opened the door. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 days. He was wearing the same wrinkled pajamas from Sunday night. He looked past the deputy, his eyes landing on me, standing quietly on the sidewalk. He knew it was over. The deputy handed him the final execution of eviction and informed him they had exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises. What followed was a scene of absolute chaotic humiliation. Because they had no money to hire a moving company and no friends left in the neighborhood willing to help them, they had to drag their belongings out themselves, under the strict supervision of the armed deputies. The homeowner association president, Mr. Henderson, stood on his porch next door, watching the entire spectacle while sipping his morning coffee. The rest of the neighborhood peeked through their blinds, eager to witness the final downfall of the arrogant family that had lied to them all. My mother dragged her heavy, expensive designer suitcases out the front door, sobbing uncontrollably. She tripped over the concrete step, dropping a velvet jewelry box that spilled fake pearls across the driveway. Audrey followed shortly after, struggling with black plastic trash bags filled with her pastel maternity clothes. She was crying so hard she could barely breathe, complaining loudly to the deputies that she was pregnant, and this was a violation of her human rights. The deputies completely ignored her, professionally instructing her to keep moving and clear the walkway. Then came Kendrick. He did not look arrogant anymore. He looked like a trapped rat. He was frantically shoving his expensive silk shirts and his useless computer monitors into the back of his leased sedan. He kept dropping things, his hands shaking violently. He was not just scared of the eviction, he was terrified of the massive debt hanging over his head. The deputies began assisting with the larger items, hauling the heavy mahogany dining chairs, the oversized flat-screen television, and the expensive living room rugs out the front door. They dumped everything unceremoniously onto the front lawn. I watched with quiet, profound satisfaction as their entire fake luxury life was piled up on the dead winter grass. In a stroke of beautiful poetic irony, the deputies piled their designer bags and heavy furniture on the exact same spot where my mother had carelessly tossed my cheap blue suitcase just a few days ago. My father walked out of the house for the last time. He did not say a single word. He did not look at me. He just walked to his car, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. They were homeless, they were broke, and they had absolutely no one to blame but their own toxic greed. I stood on the walkway watching them scramble around their pile of belongings like ants on a ruined anthill. It was a complete reversal of fortune. They had tried to erase me from the family, to throw me out into the cold so they could build their legacy on my stolen property. Now I was the one standing tall, holding the keys to my $1 million estate, while they were being thrown out onto the street with nothing. As Kendrick slammed the trunk of his leased sedan shut, he paused. He froze, his body going completely rigid. He was staring down the street, looking past the flashing lights of the sheriff vehicles. I followed his terrified gaze. Parked quietly at the very end of the cul-de-sac, half hidden under the shadow of a large oak tree, was a massive black SUV. It had heavily tinted windows and no front license plate. Thick white exhaust puffed steadily from its tailpipe in the freezing air. The engine was idling smoothly, a low, menacing rumble in the quiet suburban morning. It was not a police vehicle. It was not a curious neighbor. It was watching the house. It was watching Kendrick. The heavy winter air suddenly felt completely suffocating. I watched Kendrick from the safety of the front walkway. The color did not just drain from his face, it seemed to vanish from his entire body. His expensive silk shirt clung to his sweating back. He slowly lowered his hand from the open trunk of his leased sedan. He knew exactly who was sitting behind those heavily tinted windows. The hard money syndicate did not send polite collection letters. They sent collectors, and they had found him in less than 48 hours. Audrey, still wiping away her tears, noticed his sudden paralysis. She dragged a black plastic garbage bag filled with her shoes across the concrete and stopped next to him. "Kendrick, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "We need to get in the car. We need to leave before the neighbors start taking pictures." Kendrick did not answer her. His eyes were locked on the black SUV. Slowly, the passenger side window of the heavy vehicle began to roll down. Just a few inches. It was a subtle, terrifying gesture. It was a silent promise of violence. In that exact moment, the fake financial visionary, the man who had loudly proclaimed himself the ultimate provider of the family, made the most cowardly decision of his entire life. Kendrick realized that if he got into his leased sedan, the SUV would easily follow him. He would be trapped in a metal box on the highway. His only chance of survival was to disappear where the massive vehicle could not follow. "I am sorry," Kendrick whispered, his voice trembling so violently it was barely audible. "Sorry for what?" Audrey asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Kendrick, look at me. What is going on?" Kendrick dropped his car keys. They hit the concrete driveway with a sharp clatter. He took a step backward, putting distance between himself and his pregnant wife. Then, without another word, he turned around and ran. He did not just jog, he sprinted with the desperate, wild energy of a hunted animal. He bolted past the pile of expensive mahogany furniture on the lawn, slipping slightly on the winter grass, and scrambled toward the wooden side gate of the property. "Kendrick!" Audrey screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet neighborhood. "Kendrick, where are you going? Come back here." He ignored her completely. He shoved the wooden gate open, practically tearing it off its hinges, and disappeared into the narrow back alleys behind the colonial estates. He abandoned his car, he abandoned his clothes, and most importantly, he abandoned his pregnant wife to face the dangerous men he had stolen $200,000 from. The sudden commotion caught the attention of the sheriff deputies. They paused their work, placing their hands near their utility belts, but they did not pursue him. Kendrick was not under arrest. He had not committed a crime in their presence. If he wanted to run away from his own eviction, that was his legal right. Down the street, the massive black SUV shifted into gear. The engine revved loudly, a deep, aggressive roar that made my mother flinch. The vehicle slowly pulled forward, turning smoothly at the intersection, heading in the general direction of the back alleys to hunt down their target. Audrey let out a sound of pure agony. It was a guttural, heartbreaking wail. Her knees buckled and she collapsed right there on the hard concrete curb, burying her face in the black plastic garbage bag full of her clothes. Her golden child life was officially over. She was homeless, pregnant, and married to a fugitive who had just left her to save his own skin. My father, Richard, stood frozen near his own vehicle, watching his son-in-law vanish. The final piece of his fabricated legacy had just run away like a terrified child. My mother, Patricia, looked wildly around the ruined lawn. Panic completely overtook her. She looked at Audrey sobbing on the curb. She looked at the armed deputies guarding the front door. Finally, she looked at me. I was stepping into the back seat of my premium rideshare vehicle, ready to leave this nightmare behind me forever. "Wait," my mother yelled, her voice frantic. "Clara, please wait. We have absolutely nowhere to go. We do not have money for a motel. Just give us a few $100s, please." I pulled the heavy car door shut, securing myself inside the quiet, climate-controlled cabin. I looked at her through the pristine glass window. I did not roll it down. Desperate, my mother pulled her cell phone from her designer purse. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped it. She frantically tapped my name in her contacts, hoping to reach me, hoping to manipulate my empathy one last time. I watched her press the phone to her ear. I watched her expression shift from desperate hope to absolute crushing despair, because she did not hear my voice. Instead, the phone simply returned an automated message. "The number you are trying to reach has blocked you. The number you are trying to reach has blocked you." I did not stay to watch my mother process the finality of that automated message. I went straight back to my premium luxury hotel room. I had a busy afternoon ahead of me. By 2 in the afternoon, I returned to the northern suburbs. The massive colonial estate was entirely silent. The heavy wooden furniture, the cheap blue suitcase, the black garbage bags, and the terrified family were completely gone. The front lawn was empty save for the crushed pieces of bright pink plastic flamingos scattered across the dead winter grass. The neighborhood had returned to its usual quiet state. I stepped out of my premium rideshare vehicle just as a large commercial van pulled into the main driveway. The side panel displayed the logo of the most expensive locksmith in Travis County. A burly man in a heavy work jacket stepped out carrying a metal toolbox. I met him on the front walkway. "I need every single lock on this property changed immediately," I instructed him, my voice brisk and professional. The front door, the back patio, the garage side entrance, and all the sliding glass windows. Do not leave a single access point unsecured." The locksmith nodded and immediately went to work. As he began drilling out the old brass lock on the front oak door, a second commercial vehicle arrived. This one belonged to a premium residential security firm. For 5 years, my father had refused to pay for a modern alarm system. Now, I was having a state-of-the-art security network installed. I directed the technicians to place high-definition cameras at every angle of the property. If Kendrick managed to escape the loan sharks and tried to come back here, or if my parents attempted to break in, they would be arrested for felony trespassing before they even touched the doorknob. While the technicians wired the cameras, a sleek silver car pulled up to the curb. My real estate agent, a sharp woman dressed in a tailored navy suit, stepped out. She walked over to the edge of the lawn carrying a heavy wooden post and a large metal sign. With a few heavy swings of a mallet, she hammered the post deep into the soil. The bright, bold letters declared the property was officially for sale. I walked past the real estate agent and stepped through the open front door. I wandered through the empty, echoing hallways of my childhood home. The house felt massive without the heavy mahogany furniture and the suffocating presence of my family. I walked into the dining room. The carpet still bore the slight indentations where the heavy table had sat, the exact spot where my father had casually tossed my house key into my dinner plate just 4 days ago. I moved upstairs, walking past the master bedroom my parents had occupied, and stopped in front of the small guest room at the end of the hall. That tiny room had been my sanctuary and my prison. I had paid the massive property taxes and the expensive insurance premiums, yet I had allowed them to confine me to the smallest corner of my own asset. I looked at the bare walls and the empty closet. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness. I did not mourn the loss of my childhood memories, because those memories were entirely built on manipulation and conditional love. The heavy burden of seeking their approval was finally gone. I was closing this painful chapter forever. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the sole owner of my destiny. I walked back downstairs and stepped out onto the front porch, locking the brand new deadbolt behind me with a satisfying heavy click. The security technicians were finishing their camera installations and the locksmith was packing up his tools. I stood on the porch, taking a deep breath of the crisp winter air. Suddenly, my smartphone buzzed in my tailored suit pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was an urgent email notification from my real estate agent, who was currently sitting in her silver car at the curb. I opened the digital document. Because of the highly desirable neighborhood, we had skipped the traditional open house process and listed the property directly to an exclusive network of investors. The document on my screen was a formal, legally binding purchase agreement. A corporate cash buyer had just submitted a massive non-contingent offer. They wanted the property immediately, exactly as it stood, without any inspections or delays. I smiled warmly, tapped the screen, and electronically signed my name on the bottom line. The buyer had just purchased the house for $850,000. The buyer had just purchased the house for $850,000. The transaction closed in less than 2 weeks, bypassing all the typical bureaucratic delays. I watched the massive wire transfer hit my corporate bank account in real time, the numbers glowing brightly on my laptop screen. That money was not just the financial value of a residential property. It was the absolute, undeniable proof of my independence. It was the ultimate severance package from a lifetime of emotional manipulation and familial abuse. 6 weeks later, I sat in the plush leather chair of an exclusive first-class airline lounge at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. A crystal flute of premium vintage champagne rested on the polished glass table next to my boarding pass. I took a slow sip, letting the crisp, cold liquid celebrate the quiet victory of my new reality. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched the airplanes taxi down the runway, preparing to take off into the endless blue sky. I was about to be on one of them. I had officially accepted a highly lucrative offer to become a director-level auditor at a prestigious Big Four accounting firm in Manhattan. I was leaving Texas, leaving the stifling suburbs, and leaving the suffocating history of my toxic family entirely behind me. My new luxury penthouse in New York was already fully furnished and waiting for my arrival. I had packed my belongings into high-end designer luggage, a sharp and beautiful contrast to the cheap blue suitcase my mother had thrown at my feet just 2 months ago. I did not leave a forwarding address. I completely changed my phone number, my personal email, and my contact information. However, the homeowner association president, Mr. Henderson, simply could not resist sending me one final message through my LinkedIn profile before I deleted it. He wanted to gossip about the spectacular downfall of my family. I did not reply to him, but the information he provided offered a perfect clinical sense of closure. According to Mr. Henderson, the Internal Revenue Service did exactly what they promised. They froze every single financial asset my father had and officially indicted him for severe federal tax fraud. My parents were currently living in a cramped, rundown motel on the outskirts of the city, relying entirely on my mother and her meager Social Security checks to survive. Their precious social status was completely obliterated. As for the golden child, her fake perfect life had completely imploded. Kendrick never came back. He was still actively on the run from the underground hard money syndicate, leaving Audrey completely alone to deal with the terrifying fallout. She was forced to move into a tiny government-subsidized apartment entirely dependent on state welfare programs to prepare for her new baby. The homeowner association had permanently banned all of them from ever setting foot in the neighborhood again. They had demanded that I fund their delusions. They had called me a useless spinster taking up space. But the very moment my financial support vanished, they collapsed like a fragile house of cards. They learned the hardest lesson possible. You cannot build a legacy on stolen ground, and you certainly cannot survive when you maliciously bite the only hand that has been quietly feeding you for half a decade. I took another sip of my champagne, leaning back into the comfortable leather chair. I felt a profound sense of absolute peace. For so many years, I believed that family was an unbreakable bond. Society constantly tells us that blood is thicker than water, that we must forgive and endure the abuse of our relatives simply because we share the same genetics. But as a senior auditor, I view the world through the strict lens of debts, assets, and liabilities. I am here to tell you that toxic family is a debt you absolutely do not have to pay. You do not owe your sanity to people who constantly disrespect your boundaries. You do not owe your hard-earned success to people who actively try to tear you down. You are not required to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic people warm. The guilt they try to place on your shoulders is nothing more than a manipulation tactic to keep you under their control. When you finally find the courage to walk away, to cut the cord, and stop funding their disrespect, you will realize that their power over you was just a complete illusion. You hold the keys to your own life. They told me to leave the key and not come back. It was the greatest gift they ever gave me. My flight has just been called for first-class boarding. I am ready to start my new life. Have you ever had to evict toxic family from your life? Share your story in the comments. I am Clara, and walking away was the best investment I ever made. Clara's story serves as a powerful reminder that blood relations do not automatically entitle anyone to your resources, your peace of mind, or your unconditional submission. The most profound lesson learned from this narrative is the absolute necessity of establishing and enforcing uncompromising boundaries, especially with those who claim to be family. For years, Clara was the invisible pillar holding her family's extravagant and deceitful lifestyle together. Because she was their daughter and sister, they expected her to quietly absorb their financial burdens while simultaneously enduring their emotional abuse and blatant disrespect. Society often conditions us to believe that we must tolerate mistreatment from our relatives, trapping us in a cycle of relentless obligation and guilt. However, Clara's ultimate triumph demonstrates that toxic family members are a heavy, destructive debt that you are simply not obligated to carry. True empowerment comes from recognizing your own inherent value and refusing to let others use you as a disposable safety net. By leveraging her financial literacy, legal rights, and unwavering emotional control, Clara dismantled the false narrative her family had built. She proved that when you stop funding your own disrespect, manipulators quickly lose their power over you. Walking away from a toxic environment is not an act of cruelty or malice. It is an act of profound self-preservation. It is about protecting your assets, both emotional and financial, from those who would drain you completely dry without a second thought. Ultimately, Clara's journey teaches us that our loyalty must first belong to ourselves. We have the absolute right to close the door on relationships that offer nothing but exploitation and pain regardless of shared genetics. Evaluate the relationships in your own life to ensure you are not funding your own disrespect, and take the necessary steps today to formally evict any lingering toxicity from your personal space.